No, we understand that.
Yes.
Are you burning any during May?
Sir?
Are you gonna do any burning during the month of May?
Probably not, because there is this new, the northern long-eared bat. And that has recently been listed, so that is outside of our operating season. That is, I think that's during the calf, I think what they call the calf inside the birthing season. So no, also, we don't typically do any of our burns during times that may have an adverse impact on our recreational users.
Well, turkey nest too, right?
Yeah.
May.
So, yeah, we typically try not to burn.
Just one last question,
Yes, sir.
just a definition.
Yes, sir.
It's not a loaded question. But you say we find ourselves where we're at today kind of as a negative. So we find ourselves where we're at today. What do you mean? What did you mean by that?
It's basically the reason that we find ourselves is at a point where we're still struggling to build the trust that we've been struggling to build for a long, long time. Where we find ourselves is actually, we're all here because we're passionate about the things that we believe and the values that we hold. We haven't always communicated effectively with each other, or we've attempted to communicate at each other. So what I'm hoping is through these types of meetings, what happens is that, like you and I, when there are questions that you have about different things, what do? You pick up the phone and you say, hey, John, what's going on? I'm getting calls. You want things, within the confines of the relationship that we've established. If you have a need, what do? Do you feel the need to for you, or do you pick up the phone and say, hey, John, I had a question about this thing that y'all are doing. Can you send that over to me? And the response is, as quick as I can, as my time allows, I get you what you need, and then I make myself available to sit down and have those conversations. That's how we're going to get beyond. Talking at each other hasn't worked. So let's talk to each other and figure out what those answers need to be. And let's also go into it, agreeing to be disagreeable sometimes. Sometimes, with certain things, the point that Ms. Della just made was perfect. We're not always going to agree, but if that's the right thing, if that's the right scientific things, and we have the research to support it, let's try and see. If we're wrong, I'll be the first to say, oops, we messed that one up. But by going that route, what happens is that the lessons that are learned here, we can extrapolate that across the whole. Because guess what, we have this funny thing called the demonstration authority, which gives us the ability to be a little more creative with stuff and to try things out. And if it works and it benefits us here, chances are it will benefit somebody someplace else, right? So communication is the key. Two-way communication. So, is that, to get back to your question, that was not intended to be a negative. That was intended to be an honest. We have to be okay being challenged within our own thoughts of what's right and wrong. And we have to be okay getting out of our own comfort zones, because without discomfort, there is no growth. Are there any additional questions? Yes, ma'am.
So you're asking this body, wanting to increase management, is that what you're asking?
What I'm asking this body to do is to be willing to entertain those opportunities when they present themselves. Right place, right time, right scale, right scope, all those things. Just because it says that this place used to burn 20,000 acres, doesn't mean that we're asking for that. Because those parameters that we operate in are just that. This place is like no place on earth as it relates to the weather. We can get a weather forecast out of Paducah and it can say everything is perfect. But on the ground, it is wrong, so those burns don't occur. It may be that was a 1,000 acre or 2,000 acre burn that day, planned, that goes nowhere. Conversely, there are days when we actually look at stuff that is already planned out, lined out, ready to go, where it's like, okay, this is only supposed to be 500 acres, but if we can get another 200 and it's still a prescription, we may do that. There needs to be an acceptance of the fact that we're doing the best that we can based upon the science that we use, and that we're taking all of these conditions into effect before we light the first match. So what we're asking is Grace.
Yeah,
Yes.
we got Brian, we'll get one more question from Brian, he's on the rest of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but
So-
Brian,
John, good job. And curious how much you all burn as staff versus contractors and with partners, or is it a mixture thereof?
We burn everything here with staff. Occasionally we'll use ADs, which is our administratively determined still staff. Contractors wise, we don't do anything. With partners occasionally, with the skill sets that we have to offer, my staff has actually gone out to assist in different times in different areas. But very rarely do we have anyone outside of the agency here on the unit actively burning. But even if they are here, they still adhere to the Forest Service policy, the not 1900 policy, but the number escapes me right now. But the firefighter safety policies, guidelines, and directions for Forest Service. No. Sorry. Answer.
Yeah.
Right, well,
Got one other quick question.
sir,
If we burn the 20-acre plot today,
yes, sir.
how many years in the future would that need to be burned again?
What is our intent?
You tell me.
No, and the
No,
reason,
seriously, how often does proper management lend itself to repetitively burning acreage?
typically, most of our burns here that we have, let's say a grass field, every 3 years. Why is that? Because the first year you clean it off, the second year you get nice green, pretty, kind of thatchy. By the third year, by the third year, it's actually probably going to be about 2 foot tall. It's going to be thicker and real thatchy at the bottom, and it's time for it to be basically start turned over. Also, if we can do it within that first 3 years, a lot of those invasive woody materials don't have an opportunity to establish. They'll have a root collar, which is about an inch in diameter. And we can kill them off with fire. A nice, slow moving, controlled, managed fire does exactly the same thing at a cheaper price than a bush hog. So, okay. And it returns all those nutrients back to the ground. We recycle those nutrients right back. Any additional questions? Hearing none. Thank you all.
Thanks, John, for. Oh, Russell, last minute, while somebody was out not feeling well, so great job, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Actually, now we can turn it to the heritage presentation, Chris is here. Okay, we're just working to get his presentation up.
Here, I'll get it.
Screen, so that
Right, yes.
Fires are back.
I didn't, if I had not just that place where it gets on the years.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's great.
Must be the same.
But I guess it's one of those things. Get it, but it's just something. If you try fire. Why not? If it was too reason, particularly because you do have to speak your fire.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
They can have those double density fires close to
But you got.
Yes.
Ages soon.
I run 3 miles every morning. Are you telling me? No. Still much better.
Oh, God.
Makes it encouraging.
I'll watch.
Yeah. Yeah.
High school.
We'll see.
Yeah. Hello. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna use my time today to talk to you about African American lives and landscapes. With the lakes. Who am I? I am Chris Thornock. I'm the Heritage Program Manager here. I'm also an archaeologist, the tribal liaison at Land Between the Lakes. I joined the Forest Service and Land Between the Lakes in 2015. Before that, I was the compliance archaeologist at the University of South Carolina. Can you hear that? Tired? Before that, I was the compliance archaeologist at the University of South Carolina. And we ran all the archaeology for Savannah River site. So they had a different program for that Forest Service managed property. They go to the university, and we had 10 archaeologists there to manage a site that was about the same size as Land Between the Lakes. So, you know, you might want to think about that. We can use fire.
Plug it in.
Department of Energy.
Department of Energy has a larger, giant budget. So where are we? We are down here in western Kentucky, far away from the center of the land, between Lake Barkley and Kentucky, like the Cumberland River and the Tennessee River, an area known as Between the Rivers historically. Where I came from, South Carolina, I did my undergraduate work at a antebellum plantation site in the Low Country. Very stereotypical, gone with the wind type of situation of African-American history from that time period. Once I started looking at our area in Western Kentucky, it's a very different dynamic, culturally different from what you think about from classic movies. And so these are some of the folks we're going to talk about today in our African-American histories of Western Kentucky. We'll hit on each of these folks as we move through time. Our area of interest, like I said, most of our studies that we've been looking into, at least for this program, are in Lyon County and Trigg County. 90% of the time they're between the rivers, but you know, it's not completely isolated. Our folks move back and forth across the rivers. And like I said, it was known as Between the Rivers since folks started coming in the earliest documents, people refer to this area as Between the Rivers. We've got two different African-American populations in Lyon and Trigg counties. I would like to point out that Tennessee also has a rich African-American history between the rivers. I just haven't gotten down there to study it yet. I've been really focusing on the Kentucky side, but I have a feeling that all of the interesting stories that occur with these communities up here, there's just as rich of a history down here. They've got the iron industry, they've got farming populations, just like we have up here in the Kentucky. Well, like I was saying, there's basically two historical populations of African Americans in this area. You've got the farming populations out here in the rural lands, mostly located up in Lyon County. And then you've got the iron industry populations located along the Cumberland River, where that industry was most prominent. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the iron industry history in this area of Land Between the Lakes. We've got Mammoth Furnace, Golden Furnace, Center Furnace, and Empire Furnace. Those are the large furnaces in this section. So as a quick overview, Empire Furnace was built in 1843 by Dr. Thomas Tennessee Watson. It stood on the banks of the Cumberland River, and that is completely underwater today. Soon after he built it, he partnered with he partnered with Daniel Hillman. And then after Thomas Tennessee Watson died, that transferred sole ownership over to Hillman. If you go on our heritage trail up near our nature center today, you can still see Tennessee Watson's burial monument. And we actually just cleaned that the other day. And there's historical graffiti on there from 100 years ago. Somebody carved their initials inside there. Graffiti has been a long-standing problem. In his will, he says, "I will and desire that my old and faithful servant Hannibal be set free at my death and to be furnished with a comfortable cabin and 20 acres of good land and be paid $20 annually for my estate during life. I will and desire that the following faithful servants, Caldonia, Mary and Jim Shoemaker, her husband, Isaac and Circe, his wife, and their two children, Jesse Cox and Mary Ann, his wife, and their child Hannibal, be set free." So upon his death, there's different layers of slave owning in this area during that time period. Some people had a few house servants. Some people, like these iron barons, had lots. And then you'll see in some of these situations that in the wills that we see, they're actually naming the people in their household to be set free, which is fascinating. If we look at so he dies in 1846. We look at the 1850 Trigg County Census. I looked for all these people, and I did find Jesse Cox, Mary Ann Cox, and their son Hannibal Cox. They're still living right in the Center Furnace area 4 years after emancipation. And their neighbor one door down is Daniel Hillman, the iron master of that area. So even 4 years later, they chose to stay in the Center Furnace or Empire Furnace community. The next is Mammoth Furnace, built in 1845 by Charles Stacker. 31 feet tall. In 1857, it produced 1,500 tons of iron. And this one is actually, you can still go to the edge of Lake Barkley and see the pile of what used to be that furnace stack in that area. Charles Stacker died in 1853. In the 1850 census, the Stacker brothers who ran the furnace had 101 enslaved people. So that's 101 enslaved people who run one furnace up in that area. Fulton Furnace, 2 years later, Watson and Hillman built Fulton Furnace in 1845. Again, after Watson dies, Daniel Hillman takes over, and that one ended right before the Civil War. And then there's Center Furnace, built in 1852. They called it the granddaddy of them all, built by Hillman. And Center Furnace is the largest and longest running furnace in our area, and it actually operated through the Civil War into the late 1800s and I believe early 1900s. Here's Daniel Hillman himself. So as a rundown, 1843, he partners with Watson. They built Fulton Furnace. They moved the Tennessee rolling mills up into our area in 1845. Watson dies in 1846, leaves all of this to Hillman, and then he builds Center Furnace in 1852. So in less than 10 years, Daniel Hillman has amassed an iron empire in our area. Here is Center Furnace as it appeared in 1919, not long after its last blast. You can see it's rapidly crumbling. Here's what it looks like today outside of our nature center. And this is just the brick stack that was in the center of a much larger facility. If you look historically how these things ran, you had the center stack. You brought in all your raw materials, your iron ore, your flux, the charcoal that was made from cutting down all the forests in the area. The laborers bring that in, dump it in the top, it heats up, melts all the iron. The iron flows out the bottom into these bars that they call pigs. They call it pig iron. And so that's one product is the pig iron. Then there's a second byproduct called slag. In our area, the slag is a rock that's kind of blue and glassy. And they produce so much of it that they had piles of it all around the Lyon County, Trigg County area, and actually even used it as gravel along the roadways. And so as you're driving through Land Between the Lakes, a lot of times you'll see these outcroppings of a beautiful blue rock, or a lot of times on the shoreline where a road used to be. And that's the slag produced from the iron industry. And here is a map created by my coworker, Carl Fagans, the other archaeologist that we have here at Land Between the Lakes, to show you the extent. So not only, so today we just have that center crumbling stack, right? And that was part of a much larger complex that occupied the furnace. Now outside of the furnace, you had the coal shed, the ore lab, blacksmith shop, stables, boarding house, the company store. You had the community for the white population, community for the African-American population, the Iron Masters house. It was a city. Completely, it was a community city or an industry company town, all focused around one large furnace. So why do we talk so much about the iron industry in Lyon and Trigg counties with our African American community discussion? It's because the labor force for these furnaces was the local African American community. Back to Hillman for a second. If you look in the census in 1850, here's Daniel Hillman. His occupation is listed as Iron Master, and he has a wealth of $30,000. And at this point, he owns Empire Furnace, Fulton Furnace, and Tennessee rolling mills. If we jump ahead 10 years, now his real estate value, still listed as Iron Master, his real estate value is $100,000, but his personal estate wealth is $300,000. So that's a giant escalation. And this wealth is not, bars of gold, it's humans. If we look at the Trigg County slave census, let's look at the difference for a second. You've got a free person census. Every human is named, that's their age, their sex, their occupation, where their fathers come from. All their personal information is gathered in the census at that time period. Then you go to the enslaved person census and the names are gone. You've got the name of the owner, and then next to that, you have age, sex, and race. In this case, it's either black or mulatto is what's listed as race. Down here at the bottom of this page, you can see Daniel Hellman in 1850, and those are the folks that worked for him. And he takes up this page and this column and this column and this column and most of that column of human beings. So he's got in Trigg County in 1850, there are 155 human beings owned by Hillman in Trigg County. But he's in northern Trigg County. So if we go up to Caldwell County, part of which is now Lyon County today, we've got an additional 98 slaves owned by him personally. And then he's in a business relationship with the Hillman Van Leer Company. Again, an iron production, I'm sorry, I'm standing when you're wrong. Iron production group up in Lyon County. There. I found this newspaper ad from New Orleans, and it talks about the Hillman Van Leer Company's celebrated Tennessee iron. So while they're producing tons and tons of iron right here in Trigg and Lyon counties, they're a national company. They're selling, you know, all the way down in New Orleans with a well-known product made right here. So that everybody in 1850, that's a total of 410 slaves engaged in iron work for Hillman. If we jump up to 1860, we've increased. Here is Trigg County census again. They just begin with Hillman. He's the first person in the census because that's where all the people are. We can go down all these columns. That's 255 people in Trigg County. And then in 1960, that's 204 males, 51 females. So heavy on the labor side in the enslaved population. Hop up to Lyon County, there's an additional 121 people, again, heavy on the male side. For a total in 1860 of 376 people owned personally by Hillman. What else is there? He also owns the Tennessee Rolling Mills. And the Tennessee Rolling Mills employed an additional 1,000 people. These are people that were not owned directly by Hillman, but were enslaved populations throughout Trigg and Lyon County, and they were hired into the Hillman Company to run these amazingly large facilities, which were in what is now Rockcastle, Trigg County. And you can see they have their own company train, factories, just an amazingly large industry. If we move into 1870, now everybody's a citizen, right? So in the census, everybody has a name, everybody has an occupation, everybody has their race listed. And here you can see Andrew Smith is a farmer, Richard Young, farmer, Randy McCracken, farmer. That's our farming community. But if you come in around where Empire Furnace is today, I ran the numbers of the people working in that area along with their occupations, and you really see an interesting divide between white jobs and black jobs. So blacksmith, in that area around Center Furnace, you've got 5 black people, 1 mulatto people, no white people. Blacksmithing is an African-American job. Brick mason, 1 white guy, carpenter, 1 black guy. All the clerks, white, 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 white. If we move to the farmers in the area, farm labor and farmer. There's only 2 African-Americans who own their own farm in the area, but 83 white people, and the 83 white people are employing a whole bunch of white farm labor. The African-American community is working furnace filler, furnace founder, furnace hand, furnace keeper, furnace labor, all African-American jobs, or miller, or razor, and wagoner. It's really an interesting divide in what's going on. The African-American community is specialized in the iron industry. Here in 1870, I found this from 1870, this advertisement for a teacher, wanted a colored teacher, competent to teach 40 colored students at Center Furnace in Trigg County, Kentucky, with a liberal salary. So there was a large, even after emancipation, there's a large African-American community living around Center Furnace, and now they're employing a teacher to teach the children in that area. So the Hillmans, you've got Daniel Hillman, you've got his son, John Hartwell Hillman, and then Thomas Tennessee Hillman, named after Thomas Tennessee Watson, obviously. But there's another one I found. Again, John Hillman, he was born in Trigg County. He received a common school education. In 1868, he was a hotel waiter. Then he became the steward of the hotel, and eventually he became the custodian of the city building of Covington, Kentucky. And we find this in Prominent Negro Men and Women of Kentucky from what year? 1897. So there he is, John W. Hillman. He was the first African-American city official of Covington, Kentucky. And he came right from the Hillman area here in Trigg County. He was also the treasurer for 17 years of the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of Kentucky, just like his probable father, who was also a large Mason in Kentucky. So there's each of the Balding Hillman sons. So that was the iron industry. And what's the difference between these two communities is the iron industry that I'm looking at. You saw a whole lot of numbers, a whole lot of census records, very few names of individuals. Because after the iron industry ended, for the most part, after the 1870s and 1880s, that community dispersed out and left when the iron industry left. The farming community families stuck around for a long time, so we have long family histories in this area, which is pretty neat. Some of the families I'm going to discuss today are the Youngs, the Corks, the McCrackens, the Smiths, the Benberries, and the Hendersons. You will also notice that because during the antebellum period, like I said, in those early census records, the African-American people who were enslaved are not named. So what you'll find is that a lot of the families that we're talking about today were free early on than the enslaved community. And they're often free because there's some sort of white patriarch in there freeing them in a will early. So there's a paper trail of these families. The first family I want to talk about is the McCracken family and their friends, the Whitesides. So Hugh McCracken, he's a white guy, born in North Carolina in 1869. His father James dies in 1802. He receives a bunch of land and money and also manages money for his family. Some of his family, the Stices, had already moved out to this area of Kentucky in the early 1800s, and Hugh McCracken followed them not long afterwards. By 1820, Hugh McCracken is living in Caldwell County, which the section that he was living in would today be Lyon County. He's 41 years old, and he's living by himself on his farm. Hugh McCracken is elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives in 1822 from Caldwell and Hickman counties. And if you look here, Hickman County is the entire purchase area of Kentucky. Caldwell County, this map is kind of strange because those county lines were hopping around a whole lot in the early 1800s. But Caldwell County would have been this section between the rivers as well. So he represented Caldwell County and all of Hickman County. In 1822, this was the frontier. The Hickman County land was only purchased from the Chickasaw Indians 4 years earlier and didn't become a county until 1821. So these are the very earliest colonial senators to this area, or colonial inhabitants to this area of Kentucky. And they elected Hugh McCracken. On October 29th, 1822, he submitted a petition for Callaway and Graves counties to be organized, and included in that is both county officials and the seminaries should be included in each of these counties as well. So in 1822, Callaway was created, and then 1824, Graves County was created. And if you look here, you can see the relationship to us. Here we are between the rivers. This all became Callaway County, and then Graves County next door. So in the 1830 census, Hugh shows up living in Callaway County. There's no record of Hugh ever being married, and but all of a sudden, all these family members show up in his household. So we're thinking that's more that chain migration. He's following family over to West Kentucky, and now a whole bunch of more family, more Stices are following over to live with him as well. And then just up the road is his friend and neighbor, William Whitesides, another single white man. One of the things that you will notice is that both William and Hugh are one of only 3 families in this area that happen to own slaves. This is the slave section of the census. It's pretty bleak except for Whitesides and McCracken. After his death, after Whiteside's death, I give and bequeath to my friend Hugh McCracken the entire and whole of my estate, real and personal, mixed at his discretion, to do my will and justice to 5 persons of color this day to here set forth. Free, thank you. So he's freeing the people in his household. And then if we look up at 1840, there we see Dinah Whitesides and her family. They're the only free people of color living in the area. And it's so rare that they actually put colored next to Dinah Whitesides' name. So the total population of Callaway County in 1840 is 10,000 people, 9,000 white, 900 slave, and only 13 free people of color living in the area, 5 of which are the Whitesides family. And then Hugh is their estate manager. This probably has to do with the fact that it was not common for females to own property or free people of color to own property. So as a safeguard, they've got a white estate manager helping that family maintain their property. Of 1840, Hugh has moved back to Caldwell County, back to between the rivers. And at this point, he's got 2 free white people living in the household, but also 9 enslaved people now. They're unnamed in these records, but as we move through the records over time, we're able to match up the names of people in his household with the census records over time. Hugh dies in 1842, and he writes his will at a property located at Eddy Bend. We know where Eddy Bend is because McCracken drew the property map in 1941, and he lists the landmarks, including the Big Eddy outside of his house, which also gives its name to Eddy Creek and Eddyville, but he's living on the Between the Rivers side at Big Eddy. We also know it because Thomas Tennessee Watson, when he drew his property map, also listed the McCracken property on his map as well. So we know where his family was living in the 1840s. At least their large property tract. So Hugh McCracken is about to die. He writes his will. He talks about the Whitesides first, very first thing in his will. William Whitesides in his lifetime did constitute myself his heir, though in fact only as an agent in trust for the benefit and care of certain persons of color, by him emancipated. The avails of his estate to my discretion to be distributed to the mother and children of him emancipated and none else. So again, this is years later, he's still emphasizing the property from the Whitesides family is to be used for the help of his family members. Secondly, of the temporal things I possess, Randall and Perry, manservants of mine, heretofore emancipated, to be paid each $35 per annum from and after the first day of January 1836 until they are made free in law. So his will states that the McCracken property be sold, that Randall and Perry, who are 2 manservants in his household, be set free, and that they're given back pay for years of service after that money comes in. And then I was up in the Caldwell County archives, and I was able to find the receipts. In June 10th of 1846, Perry gets $280, and there's his mark. And then in December of that same year, $280 sent to Randall as well, and there's his mark. Those are the only 2 people listed in the will that actually received money from the estate. If we look at the free McCrackens in the 1850 census, we find an explosion of free McCrackens in the area after his death. You've got Millie McCracken. This was most probably Hugh's wife. although just not legally. And then she's living with 3 children. Those are probably Hugh's children. And then a grandson, Hugh, as well. You've got Artistia McCracken, then Lucy McCracken, who's probably Millie and Hugh's daughter as well, and her children. There's Perry McCracken living nearby, and Catherine McCracken Young, and in her death certificate, she actually lists Hugh McCracken and Millie McCracken as her parents. So it appears that Hugh McCracken is a successful landowner. He was selected as the state executor of a free African-American family. He lived with an African-American family until his death, and then he freed them upon his death. So what happens to the family? Here's Perry McCracken. After he's free, he goes and lives on the estate of his neighbor, Edward Smith. And he's seen here in the 1850 Smith's household sentence. That's Edward Smith. And down here at the bottom is Perry McCracken, listed as a free person living in that household. Perry McCracken passes away in 1859, and his estate is his executor is his landowner and friend, Edward Smith, who is the executor of his will. And there's their signatures. In there, Smith, as the executor, is charged with paying off Perry's debts. And one of his debts is Smith is actually paying himself $10 for waiting on Perry in his last 8 weeks of sickness. So there was definitely a relationship between these two men. There's a power dynamic. Obviously, one's a wealthy white landowner, the other is a farmer living on his land, but they're close enough that they share legal documents and they take care of each other. If we look at Smith Cemetery away, a few graves down from Edward Smith's grave, you'll find a P, and in our TVA records, the old tradition is that P stands for Perry, a Negro slave. But of course, we know that Perry was not a slave, he was actually a free person of color living on the Smith estate. But then, right next door to the P marker is an M marker. And the same oral tradition states that Mary, a Negro slave, is buried next to him. And as far as I know, those are the only 2 African-American graves in Smith Cemetery. I haven't looked too far into it much farther, but it's possible that Perry moved next door onto the Smith estate because that's where his wife was enslaved, and they continued to live there throughout the rest of their lives and were buried right in the same cemetery and row as the other Smiths that lived in the area. We look at Randall McCracken, the only other person to receive money from Hugh McCracken's estate. He's born in 1805, freed in 1842. His son Hugh McCracken was born in 1844, so a few years after Grandpa's death. And his wife, Melinda Young, was still enslaved when they were living together in the Young household. So a free Randall McCracken married an enslaved person living in the Young household. We hop forward to the 1850 census. You'll see Millie McCracken and her grandson Hugh McCracken living in that same household. But then the 1860 census, Randall McCracken and his son Hugh are living next door to the John Young family, which is where his wife is a household member. In 1870, Randall and Melinda are both free now, and they're living together in their free family in a neighborhood of extended families. So we see the Court family, the Colt family, the Smith family, Young family, and the McCracken family, all African Americans, all related, living in the same neighborhood in Lyon County. Who's John Young? Let's move to the next family. There's John Young, the myth. That was the first time I'd heard of him. In historian Bill Henry's book, he wrote the history of the Land Between the Lakes area. He writes that John Young was a freedman who purchased his wife's freedom from a slaveholder in Virginia, and they became the ancestors of the colored people of the community, the Youngs Grove community. We searching through the historical records, we found a different story. John Young Sr. was a white guy born in South Carolina in 1780s, and he was an early white settler, just like the others to Western Kentucky. In the 18th census for Caldwell County, You see one white male and one white female and 4 white boys. That's John Young Senior's white family. Move to 1820, again, even larger, now they've got 7 children. And now they also have 3 slaves living in that household as well. Here in the 1830 census, now it's just an older white male, a younger white male, the rest of the family has left, and then 2 slaves living in the household. And then in 1840, we can see John Young Senior living with his son John Young Jr., and now there's 5 enslaved people in the household. So just changing over time through the records. And then John Young Senior dies and he writes his will as well. These are a huge wealth of information for our area. In November, he writes this. He's talking about the history of his family here. In November of 1836, John Young Senior and John Young Jr. made a verbal agreement that Jr. would reside with, support, and take care of Senior until his death. And in return, Jr. receives the estate. So you saw that John Young Senior had at least 6 white children, but the estate goes to John Young Jr. because they had this contract where he's going to take care of his father. And then also in the same document, Senior is bequeathing the slaves as well. A colored slave girl named Melinda, age 9 years old, a colored slave girl named Phyllis, 6 years old, a colored slave girl named Margaret Jane, age 3 years old. The mother of the formers I this day emancipate, named Jenny. So again, a really interesting record because we're finally getting the names of the enslaved people living in Lyon County. If we look at the 1841 census, we see 3 young enslaved girls, and so now we know their names are Melinda, Phyllis, and Margaret Jane. The adult female is Jenny, and based on other records in the future, we can guess that the male is named Joseph. Witnessing the document is Hugh McCracken. So we know that Young and McCracken and Whitesides are all signing each other's documents. They all appear to be in relationship with enslaved women, and all of those women are set free upon their deaths. And that's really, these are the founding African-American families that would become the community leaders later on. Here in 1850, we see John Young Jr. He's living with an older, 10 years older Jenny, and then a set of folks who are mulatto living in their household as well. But that's not the whole story. We've got a mixed family living together. But then when you go and look at the slave records, John Young Jr. is still a slave owner, and Melinda, Phyllis, and Margaret Jane are still within that household as slaves. So it's a really interesting dynamic of white people, black people, mulatto, slave, and free, all living in the same household at the same time. 1860, here's John Young again. John Young, the only free people in his household listed at this time are him and Shandy Coyne, who's a neighbor, and then next door to them, Randall and Hugh McCracken. By 1860, the number of enslaved people in the John Young household has increased. And that is because the people living in that household are now having children. This includes the children of Randall McCracken, who lives next door, who's married to Melinda McCracken in the household, and Shandy Court, a free person of color, who's married to Phyllis, an enslaved person living in the household. So these are the children of John Young Senior and Junior. They both refer to themselves as John Young, so it's hard to know heritage in this situation. But we've got Joseph, Andrew, Melinda, Phyllis, Margaret Jane, Amanda Jane, and Catherine. If we look at Joseph Young throughout his life, after his father, we can assume that his father is Joseph Senior because he's nearly the same age as John Young Jr. He marries a free woman, Rebecca Whitesides, in 1840, and they eventually found the Young Groves community in Land Between the Lakes. In 1882, John Young acquires a large piece of property from the Fuchs and Newby's family. And by early 1900s, Young's Grove was operating a school and a Free Will Baptist church in the area around Newby Cemetery. And here's a photo of Young's Grove school group today. In 1932, William and Melinda Young transferred ownership of Young's Grove School over the Lyon County Board of Education, quote, for the benefit of the colored school and for, quote, their deep interest in the public school for the children of their community. And you can see that the public school children in that community were doing pretty well at that time period. We move on to the next children down. Andrew Young married a free woman, Catherine McCracken. You recognize the same names over and over again. And they lived in the John Young household for quite some time. There is Amanda McCracken. So after her father's death, she moves into the Young household as a free person of color, and she's living with Andrew Young. And there's Andrew Young's marker in his cemetery today. Nice monument. Melinda Young, the next child down, marries a free person named Randall McCracken, again coming from the McCracken family, and they went on to have 9 children. You can see there's Randall, and at this point, he's married to Melinda, who's still enslaved in there, and by 1870, they're both free and living together. Phyllis Young marries a free person named Shandy Cork, and again, they're living in the John Young household. 1860, she's still enslaved. By 1870, there they are with all their children. Margaret Jane, also known as Hannah, she marries a free person named Randall McCracken. He would go on to become a U.S. colored troops vet with the 116th Infantry. And Amanda Jane Young marries another veteran named Andrew Smith in 1867 after Andrew Smith came back from war. And then Catherine Young marries another veteran named Owen Benberry in 1867 after Benberry comes back from Texas after the Civil War. And there's their certificate. So what's fascinating is that all the Young family, whether they were enslaved or not, are continually marrying free African Americans in the community. By the point that these 2 children got married, it was after the Civil War, and their husbands were already free, fighting for the Union Army. We know what the John Young property is too, because they had property maps back then, and this one is listed from the Hillman Empire again as the John Young property. And I went out to the John Young property. Most of this is underwater now, but on the hill overlooking the fields, we found the old items belonging to that time period. And so we're fairly certain that's the John Young household in that area. Daffodils still come up every year in that area right around the pits. Now you can look out over the lake, and that tree I'm almost certain was there 100 years ago when the family was living there. Move on to the Cork family. That starts with Eli Ingram in 1830 census. Here's Eli and his family. And they also had 3 slaves at this point in the 1830s. 1840, Eli's family has grown, and I guess 5 enslaved people. But by 1850, the Ingrams no longer have any enslaved people in their household, but they are living with 7 free people of color, the Cork family, from Matilda, her sons Shandy, James, and on down the line. And if you look right there, Shandy Cork, you'll remember his name, the 1850 census, he's now free and living with that family. But also within the 1850 census, that was a Trigg County census. Up in Lyon County, there's a Shandy Ingram. He comes from the Ingram household. So I'm thinking that Shandy was actually counted twice because in this one, he's a laborer listed living in Lyon County. The censuses were taken during 2 different months, so he could have easily moved over to the neighbor's house in Nice County over. And this Shandy Ingram is also living 1 house away from the John Young household, which would become his future father-in-law. Shandy moved into the Young household and married Phyllis by 1860. Meanwhile, his brother James, he moved next door to the McCracken family and marries Billy McCracken. It's family trees between the rivers are more like thickets and bushes. Everybody's related. Both Shandy and James registered for the draft, but there's no indication that they ever served in the Army. The Smith family, we've got Elias Smith, moves to South Carolina in 1796. He's in Western Kentucky by 1840. Andrew Jackson Smith is born in Lyon County in 1843 to Susan, an enslaved woman living in the Elias Smith's household. And the oral tradition states that Elias Smith would be Andrew Jackson Smith's father. In 1860, Elias Smith, who has a large white family, is not living with any of his white children are grown. I think his wife is still alive, but not living there. He's living as the only white person in a household with 25 enslaved people. And then we look there, judging on age, that's possibly Andrew Jackson Smith listed in the unnamed slave record. In 1861, Elias dies and again leaves us a great will. In there, he says that Harrison P. Smith, that's his son, shall take care and provide for my wife Susan. William Smith shall take care and provide for my Negro woman Elsie, to treat said Negroes differently from all other slaves and keep them each comfortable and with all the necessities of life as long as they live. And then if you look at the inventory record, you can find Susan, Andrew Jackson Smith's mother, listed as 50 years old and $350. And then at the end, you'll see Andy, and he's listed as a runaway, and he would have been 18 years old at the time. So what happened to Andy? Oral tradition states that Andy learned of the Smiths family's intention to go and keep him as a servant during the Civil War. So he heads out along with his friend Alfred Bissell. If you look on there, you've got Andy and Alf, both runaways. Andy and Alf run away to Smithland, Kentucky, and fell in with the 41st Infantry. You cannot be soldiers at this time in the Union Army, so they're servants of the folks in the Army, and Andrew becomes the servant of Major John Warner. He would go on to be in the battles of Fort Henry and the Battle of Shiloh. Both Warner and Smith were wounded at the Battle of Shiloh. The story is that Smith was taking care of Warner's horses. Warner goes out into the battlefield of Shiloh, his horse gets shot out from under him. So Andrew Jackson Smith grabs the next horse, runs out on the battlefield, gives it to Warner, heads back to the horses again. Warner's still battling, the next horse gets shot out from under him. Smith grabs the next horse, runs back out on the battlefield, and at this point, they're both shot. They both lived, they both went back to Illinois to Warner's estate to recover after the Battle of Shiloh. After recovering, the Emancipation Proclamation is passed, and not only was it freeing slaves in the rebellious states, but it also allowed African Americans to join the Union Army. Upon hearing this, Smith heads out to Massachusetts, which is the area where they're first organizing this opportunity. And if you've ever seen the movie, what's the movie?
Glory.
Glory. If you've ever seen the movie Glory, that's about the Massachusetts 54th. Andy shows up just a little bit late. The 54th already ships out, and Andy joins the 55th Massachusetts Colored Infantry. During his service, he actually is fighting the Battle of Honey Hill. Again, the oral tradition states that they're attacking the fort. The person holding the flag in front of him gets shot down, so Andy picks up the flag and holds the flag for the remainder of the battle. He survives. He's promoted to an officer and the color guard, so he continues to hold the flag throughout the remainder of the Civil War. And for that, he was given a Medal of Honor. He was actually nominated for the Medal of Honor after the Civil War, but they weren't giving medals of honor to African Americans during that time period, so he was denied. Some historians found old records of the nomination records and said, this is a really cool story. They brought him back up, renominated him, and that's his daughter, Miss Washington, and she's receiving the Medal of Honor from Bill Clinton in 2001 for her father. After returning from war, Andrew Jackson Smith goes on to marry the daughter of John Young. He becomes a father. He bought and sold land. In one document, he's also listed as a lawyer, and he lives a long and productive life. There is his grandson, Andrew Bowman, at our Andrew Jackson Smith marker at the north end of Land Between the Lakes. And so on that, this marker is also located at the location of Oakland School. We have 3 African-American schools. Oakland School is built on the Andrew Jackson Smith property. The other schools, we learned about Young's Grove, set up on the John Young property or Joseph Young property. Oakland School set up on the Andrew Jackson Smith property. The third one up in that area is Henderson Chapel School, set up on the Henderson property. Gilliam Henderson, an African-American, born in 1846 near Memphis. Gilliam joined up with the Union troops in Memphis during the Civil War and served in Nashville through 1866. By 1870, he's moved to Golden Pond. He's working in the iron industry with his family. By 1880, Gilliam and his family are living in Lyon County around other African-American families. The Bonners, the Edwards, and the Murrays are all African-American families living in the area, and he's listed as a farmer. By 1910, the African-American community has grown with the Corks and the Rhodes and the Ingrams, probably because the Henderson family was now running an African-American school in that area, and Gilliam's son, William, was the African-American school teacher there for at least 30 years. That probably was both a school and church in the same building in that area. We don't have any pictures of the church, which I would really like to find some someday, but we do know its location because of Henderson Chapel School, located directly across the street from Henderson Chapel Cemetery. So we have a good idea of where the school once was. And lastly, I know it's been a long time here. We'll talk about the Benberry family. Owen Benberry was born in 1840 on the farm of Benjamin Benberry. The names are interchangeable. This is probably him. You can see it again in the slave census. You've got Benjamin and all the people living on his property, living right next door to John Smith and Edward Smith and John Young. Edward Smith, Perry McCracken's living on that property at the time, and there's the John Young family. In 1864, Owen goes and joins the 8th U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery. He was stationed in Paducah, where he protected Fort Anderson and fended off from attacks by Nathan Bedford Forrest at that time. The 8th Colored Infantry was also involved in several other local battles in the area. And eventually, he gets sent down with the rest of his unit down to Texas, where he's mustered out in 1866. I don't know the date when he was sent down to Texas, but in 1865, that's Juneteenth, the proclamation of the emancipation of the African Americans living in Texas, and he may have been stationed in Texas at that time. But then, before the first anniversary, in 1866, he heads back to Lyon County and ends up marrying Kitty Young, that she is, in 1867. Owen and Kitty go on to have 11 boys over the next 21 years, very productive family. One of those boys here is Shandy Benberry, named after family relatives. Shandy Benberry passes away in 1853 at the home of his son Ewing, and they hold the services at Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. That's the church associated with the Andrew Jackson Smith property across from the Oakland School. So Shandy's son Ewing is a community leader. These are from TVA documents that we have here. Mr. Ewing Benberry is a natural leader of the 20 Negro families that formerly made up the community of Little Chicago and Lamberton Lakes. Although he worked in the building trades, his main interest was a motel popular with fishermen. And there we see Mr. Benberry's motel along what is now our trace at Land Between the Lakes. Mr. Benberry's hotel was across the street from Mary Major's restaurant. And TVA documents again. Mary Major's operated a small roadside restaurant in the Little Chicago community of Land Between the Lakes. Although the structure could barely meet health standards of roadside service, Mary Major's food was famous among fishermen, hunters, and a few vacationers. It goes on to read, under the leadership of Mr. Benberry, Mary Major's relocated with the rest of the community her new Tiny Castle restaurant across the street from Mr. Benberry's motel. It serves country-style meals that draw people from throughout a 50-mile radius Lunches, suppers, and Sunday dinners at Mrs. Majors are events that can be sampled by diet watchers only on special occasions. And this isn't an advertisement, it's just what people are writing in government records. There's Mary, here's her new restaurant. There's Julian. His new Mary Motel, located in Conchagua. Mary Major's new restaurant, Mary Major's. And so the story goes that Mr. Benberry was a landowner along the Tennessee River when they were impounding for Kentucky Lake. At that time, just like everybody else who was angry, the government stealing their land, Mr. Benberry fought in court and said, no, you can't take my land. The government said, we're going to flood it. We're taking it. And so he fought that battle, lost, used the money to go and start his motel and his other businesses in the little Chicago area, like between the lakes, which is now near our northern Welcome Station. Government comes back again a few years later and says, guess what? We're creating land between the lakes. We're going to take all this land again. And this time he didn't fight it. A lot of people in Man Between the Lakes were angry, said, no, you can't take our land. Not once, not twice, but sometimes 3 times in the same family in about a 20-year period. He acts proactively. He sells his property early, gets the money he can, and then goes to the city of Catawba, says, hey, I want to move my community up into this area. Can you guys run electric and water lines out to this plot of land that I bought? And they said, sounds like a good idea. We'd like to help, but nobody lives there. Why are we going to run? Why are we going to have electricity and water going out to a vacant area? If you fund it and people show up, then we'll reimburse you for the cost of the infrastructure development. So Mr. Benberry funds that, puts water, electricity in that area, subdivides it, builds his motel. Mary Majors buys across the street, builds her restaurant. They build the new Mount Pleasant Baptist Church down the street. And the entire community moves across the river. I don't know, so many communities in Land Between Lakes broken up and lost. And he managed to keep his entire community together. It's a cool story. Oh, that brings us to Community Heritage Interpretation Projects, what I call CHIPS. We did one of these with the Golden Pond overlay. Basically what we're doing is the community of Golden Pond, just like all the other communities, were wiped out. But over a 13-year period, working with the local population, they provided all the information, they provided the names, they provided the photographs, they provided all these ideas so we could present it to the public in a way that the former residents wanted their own history to be presented. And that was another success story, not as perhaps successful as the church, but again, working with the local community to interpret their own history to the public. We've got a situation right now, we're working with the fencing community to try and replicate this, hopefully in a much faster, despite my other obligations, in a much faster way to get those signs up. Johnny has proposed that we do a similar thing up in the Carmack community. And I've already bought an interpretation panel to put up in that area. Della has also approached us about working with the Woodson Chapel community. I've purchased some infrastructure for that. We just have to find the time and energy to put all that information into panels so that we can present it to the public. Other community heritage interpretation projects, I also work with the Chickasaw Nation wants to talk about their history here. We're working with the Trail of Tears on more interpretive panels along Tennessee River. And I would like to do the same thing with this wealth of African-American history that we have here also. And so this is our North Welcome Station up on the north end. Right down the road is the Andrew Jackson Smith marker on the Andrew Jackson Smith property across from Oakland School, the cemetery where Andrew's buried, and where the church was. So this was the center of the community at that time. I think we can also, develop an interpretation project easily accessible right there on the trace. One of the problems we have with the Golden Pond overlook is it's not accessible to the people who really want to see it most anymore. But in this situation, it would be right where the horse got pulled off and see it. And so that's my long presentation for today.
Yes, we say that's a question.
Hey, Chris.
Yes, sir.
You brought up something that might be good information. Is that the Golden Pond one, which is just everybody that can get there goes up there. It's a very popular place. We do need to talk about getting a little driveway up there because folks that are older than me, a lot of them, if you believe that, can't make that long walk around that anymore or never could. So there's a plan in place. I think JB's got some drawings to run a little driveway up there to that. At one point, before COVID, the county had agreed to pay for that. I don't know if the county still do it or not. But to run that little driveway up there so people can make it to that Golden Pond Interpretive Center. That's been rolled around. It kind of got shuttered, I guess, on COVID.
Yeah, that was another project they're gonna shut it with code, and that, I think discussions are warranted. I think we can continue those discussions. I think the problem that Trigg County had was that we were asking to go through the official government NEPA processes, which involves engineering drawings. And so when I was talking, with the county judge, he said, I can bring a bulldozer out here and have that road done in 2 days.
Right.
I was like, that's just not how the government works on federal lands. And so those are discussions that we should continue to have.
Maybe Ree can help us somewhere.
Yes, ma'am.
Long time coming.
Thank you for giving this presentation. It is even more to the story. One of the things, I've been working in this area for a long time. And a lot of the African American families are still here. The Stackers are here. The Benberries are up in Indianapolis. And I know Andy, Bowman. You know, they're around and they need to be part of the story. And if that hasn't happened, but they're here.
Right, so,
And the Stackers, you know, it's Black Stackers here. They're in Montgomery County.
okay,
The Marylands, they was on the Hillman, thing, the Wimberlands. Cause they were in Story County, cause I lived in, over there, I used to teach in Austin B, so I know the other side. And I know the Kentucky side. And I think they need to bring the families that's still around here. And we need to bring them into the picture. The shoulders. You know, George, so you didn't talk about them, you know, another side, the farm families, these old Black families, but also the military, because the Civil War brought a lot of Blacks to there. And there's a lot of records. If you look at the picture records, you'll find.
Okay.
Because like Anthony Baxter Smith's records are there. The Maribels, the Wimberleys, Sacker, one of them was a runaway slave. I know that because I read the records. I have a lot of the records myself. And it just behooves me why they won't bring the local community. Because it's here.
right.
They can tell a lot of these stories. They still live here, especially in Tree County and Lyons County. They live around here. They're here.
I think that's the most important part of any of these projects, working with the Benton County and Golden Pond, Benton community and Golden Pond community. They're the people providing all the information for all the interpretation that we do out here. And so while I've got some old records, I'm part of the Benberry Facebook group, and they're constantly putting cool old pictures of their family history from Lyon County from 60 years ago up there. And so those are the people that we would have to work with in any sort of co-production of an interpretation like this.
Chris, I have one last thing. When you do the interpretation, you gotta tell the whole story. You don't know. Like sundown towns, Golden Pond, even when I first moved here, was a sundown town. And that needs to be said. You know that, right? You know what a sundown town is?
Right.
Well, Blacks can't be there when the sun comes down on you behind. That's the truth. Even when I first moved here, they were still talking about it. It's people living who know it. And that needs to be interpreted and told.
Right.
The whole story needs to be told. And another thing, I think the problem with this area is because Blacks, those like you had whites and Blacks stay together. Some whites are Black, and that needs to be told. The whole story needs to be told and interpreted. And there's history, there's primary sources, it's in files. I have a lot of it. It exists.
There's an incident. I do one story.
Go ahead.
There's an incident in Marshall County with, Birmingham,
Mhm,
town of Birmingham there.
mhm.
And there was a raid with a group of white folks, went into the town, shot it up, 2 people died. They went on their way. There was court battles. It's in the court records. Well, one of the most interesting things about that is in order to get to Birmingham, you had to go through this entire African-American community to get there. So the folks that were going to raid Birmingham skipped all of the African-American communities in the rural countryside, all these farming families, and went to town. And the people that were harmed there didn't have the same names as everybody living between the rivers. Because more than likely, everybody between the rivers, they were in business relationships, there was probably blood relationships. There was a large interracial community. You know, not an equal interracial community, but they knew each other, were all family members, and at some point.
And it's still a few living. And like the Benberries, got stories of them. I typed it a long time, 20 years ago, of them that didn't have any bullets. They used nails to shoot doing Birmingham.
Wow. Yes, Kelly?
The only thing I wanted to comment, the lady that wrote the story about Andrew Jackson Smith and the book just recently came out. She had visited us back when she was getting information together. One thing she said, I thought that just spoke volumes about Between the Rivers. She said, it was really strange as I did the research on the black soldiers. She said, I've done that for years, I've done research on the black soldiers that fought in the Civil War. She said, I was struck by the fact that most of the black soldiers that came from Between the Rivers, when they were mustered out, they came back between the rivers. She said that was not the case everywhere. Most of them, when they got out, they struck out for Kansas, they left the area they lived in and went to someplace else. But she said the people from the men from the Between the Rivers, almost all of them, 100%, came back between the rivers.
That's true.
And you spoke to the fact that there was a relationship between blacks and whites. It wasn't what it should have been in some ways, but the love and the respect was there between the families. They identified with each other. And that's what made the difference, I think. The
You
identification.
know, I'm in that book that you're talking about. They use me as a primary source. Unfortunately, in the blacks left, they did go back, but then they left and pushed out. That needs to be told.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, try to do. Oh, maybe she didn't mean to read it.
Sorry.
Okay, can you guys hear us okay out there? I just want to check some of yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, we have another break right now, so we have a few minutes to, we'll get up, walk around a little bit, go to the bathroom. Get something to drink.
Tonight, right, was the event.
Yeah, we've had recreational diversity culture, and sort of. Kind of jump in tonight.
You probably don't say about it, like, since my bill.
I mean, I think.
That's much good. Thousand people. I'm just trying. She was tough. Here.
What's your name?
Back.
Who's the back?
Oh, it is, yeah. What, I see
Downtown. Yeah. Oh, that's
just about all. Including. Plus, yeah. Yeah, there's some unanswered questions. I also think there was some big service things.
See, there's a lot of people inside. You didn't ask. No. Say from me there. Oh, yeah. And I'm pretty issues. So I know all about
Is there, I'm not gonna like post it on social media, but I would like to touch some of my teacher.
Yeah, yes, I've been like, no.
You're like, look what happened today.
Oh,
All
yeah.
right. Here we go. All right, here you go. Governor of Kentucky. Maybe I could read it.
I don't want any other job house.
I'm good. Until the other side of it.
My opinion, I thought about being a president.
One of my students left 2 years ago. You know, doing journal writing and that. It's asked if they were president, the first thing they do is keep it. The White House, that is for.
I guess.
There's a White House there.
Sure is.
Thank you. That's fine. Okay. Just-
I'm saying go to your phone. I don't know what's happening.
Good luck. Oh, welcome.
I'm
I'll be out there and I see a ball being set free as much as I sit on side, it's still. But then there's some of these places. the same time. Make happy work. Because I've picked up.
Well, hello, everybody. We're gonna get back. We have 2 more sessions to go. And so we're gonna, this next one is, Jamie's gonna talk about, recreation diversity and trying to figure out. I want them to tell this story.
Yeah, so wasn't Chris's presentation good? Y'all enjoy that?
Yeah.
And y'all expect me to follow that, right? I kind of, let me make sure I'm out of the way. Stay out where make city. I'm getting there. I'm trying to chalk along. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I introduced myself last time, but for the new faces or those, I'm pretty forgettable for those who may have forgotten. My name is Jamie Three. I am the customer service staff officer or department manager at Lamington Lakes. I've been here for right at 21 years. Wore a lot of hats over the time. Grew up in the area, so very familiar with Lamington Lakes and between the rivers, and enjoyed chatting with some of you today. I kind of set this up to follow Chris by design. When we were planning this, Lisa Cook put me on the agenda and she said, "I would like for you to talk about recreation diversity." And I said, okay. I scratched my head a little bit because I'm trying to think, how do I do that, or what do I do? And I remember that Chris had put together this really, really good presentation. And I thought, well, okay, I'll dovetail off of that. I'll use that as kind of my segue. And it worked out perfect because I think some of you started engaging and I saw a lot of things going off. So really what I'm here for, I don't have a lot of information to share. I don't have any fancy slideshows or anything like that. What I'm wanting to do is kind of get you engaged. I'm looking for ideas. And so I want to know what does recreation diversity mean? Is it programs? Is it people? What kind of people? What kind of programs? And so I just open up the floor and want to start a discussion, and we'll start with you. Yes, ma'am.
Well, this area is very diverse. And there are a lot of people, when I'm saying diverse, African American, Asian Americans that will come here, that don't traditionally come, but they want to see themselves represented. So interpretive science, they need to be, the information needs to be interpreted. Like what he did today, that needs to be interpreted. You can bring in different art, that's money, right? To bring in different people. And it hasn't thus far been interpreted. People know it, I think they know. I think all in this room know a lot of that stuff. But it needs to be interpreted.
So when you say they know, what do you mean? You mean as far as marketing and reaching out, they know we're here? Or
No, I think so, but many of the Black people, I know specifically, I'm over Cherokee Park, which is the first segregated park in the South. It's in this
married
area.
there, by the way.
I even have a movie up. But I'm saying people know this area is diverse, but they haven't reached out to the diverse audiences to bring them here. So most Black people, they don't want to cross those bridges.
Okay.
We have problems getting people to come because they scared. Because we used to be a sundown town. And that's why if you interpret it like correctly and say it's okay now, it's not a sundown town now, I think people come and it will bring in money.
So that's maybe the challenge, is maybe the interpretation and the fear factor, because, we've, and I say we loosely, have tried to develop different programs or outreaches or different ideas to reach out to different groups. And I don't just mean African Americans, I mean different groups all across the board. We do have I don't know if significance is the right word. We do have some of the Hispanic population using OHV Turkey Bay area a lot. And when you say interpretation, I know you're not talking about the language barrier, but we do have that language barrier. So one thing that we've kind of talked about implementing is translation with some signage for Spanish That's one thing we've looked at, but, like you said, I'm here, I'm reaching out, I'm asking for ideas. I'm asking for not just ideas, but involvement, for partnerships, for help.
People wanna know their wealth.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, you know, how many of you know this was, used to be a sundown town? You know that? Right? How many of you know that? Be honest.
I do that.
This Golden Pond was a sundown town. Black people know that. So they don't wanna come, cause they still think it's sundown town.
So what can we do?
Just be honest.
What kind of programs can we develop?
So interpretation signs to talk about what it was, and it's not that now.
Okay? So signage,
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 that's one thing.
brochures,
Presentations like that,
stations.
programs.
And I know Chris has done a lot of outreach. He's traveled, to Duca and some other places doing his presentation before. What did you have?
Oh, Deidre's got. Deidre.
Oh, Heather, I'm sorry. I don't turn around and look behind me.
That's okay. I was been trying to chime in throughout the day. So I just want to bring up, I'm at TSU, and so our students was recently awarded a very small grant, 2,500, from the National Park Trust. And the reason I say this may kind of give you some ideas. And so this whole program is to get more students from historical Black colleges outside. And so through this grant, we've went camping at Mammoth Cave National Parks. We worked with the scientists. They introduced them to careers and things that job opportunities at Mammoth Cave, and the students camped at the park. We've worked with the Tennessee Wildlife. We took students fishing this past weekend, so we introduced them to careers in wildlife and fisheries. We will do something on stewardship and conservation. And so these are just little things that we can maybe brainstorm. Not expensive. TSU covers the transportation, and I mean, these can be implemented at other universities as well, or even K through 12. But I think these type of things can also add to the diversity. And so I just want to throw that out as it's something that, on average, we get 20 to 40 students that participate. I think we had 23 students this past weekend outside fishing in the rain. So I just want to throw that idea out there.
I'm so glad you did. That's great. So how did they do? Did they catch fish? Did they have fun?
No.
Did they enjoy it?
No, they didn't catch anything.
Sounds like me.
They didn't catch anything, but what I will say is the students had to do the buy-in because they wrote the grant, right? They're responsible for the grant management. They had to get the buy-in. They do all the planning. I'm just here to advise. And so it gives the college students that responsibility of doing all of this to buy into getting extra opportunities for their career advancement.
So what I'm capturing is giving them ownership, giving them responsibility. Is that what y'all heard? Is that,
Let me ask you, did they talk about the Bradfords when they went to Mammoth Cave? The Bradfords.
Yes, we have an ongoing relationship with Mammoth Cave. I have research projects with them. So yes, we work very closely with them and know the history of that. And they're taught that every time we go. We go multiple times throughout the year.
Do the people on this community know about the Bradfords? Can we tell them about the Bradfords? Because that's important.
yeah. I've got some time. If you want to share.
I don't think she can hear.
Can you hear us?
You want me to share? So the Bransfords, when you think about Mammoth Cave and the history of Mammoth Cave, the Bransford families was one of the first families. They were slaves that actually provided tours, and so they became internationally known. So a lot of people don't know, but the Bransford they actually are known for giving the tours in the caves at Mammoth Cave, and so one of the descendants is still working there. And so whenever we go, we try to make sure that we get him to give our students a tour when we go to Mammoth Cave. He's still working at Mammoth Cave.
I've been on a tour with him.
Have you?
I took a 4-H shirt and
I live in Russellville, so I
Yeah.
live close to Mammoth Cave.
he's good.
That's how we have interpreted.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm gonna go on a little side trail, bunny trail here. I spent some time in Clemson at the Forest Service used to host, they probably still do. It's a 2-week recreation class, a short course. And then we went over to Charleston and took several eco tours. and learned about the history and saw the sweet grass baskets. And that was one of my favorite towns. I'd love to go back and do that again. But I thought, Bill, did you have your hand up earlier?
Back to your original question about recreational diversity, two things pop in mind. Of course, obviously you can interpret that phrase any way you want to, but dovetail on what you just said. I just watched a presentation. The University of Virginia had done a long-term historical project where a couple professors led the students researching the enslaved population that actually made the University of Virginia, not only built it, but worked there to make it function all the way up through the Civil War. And capturing the names and putting that together, they used students to do that research because prior to that, none of the Black history on the University of Virginia, there was no placards, there was no nothing. I mean, the story just wasn't told. And actually, the way that university was built by Jefferson, they had hidden areas within the middle of the university where the enslaved population was kept. And there, I think there was like 160 to 180 there full-time working to make that university function. So working with students, whether it's through grants, it's going to come down to Land Between the Lakes having a lead person that's going to coordinate with outside entities, build those partnerships, and they can help you capture a lot of this. But then a piece of it's going to be, I've talked with numerous people here. Most of these historical families from this area, they have crates full of their family history. And what multiples have told us is that this generation in their 20s and 30s don't want those crates. They're terrified that grandma is going to leave them the family history that is a box after box in the attic. So you're running out of time to build partnerships with these families and have easy access to all the historical information of the families that live between the rivers, but also the people that can walk you out to the family farm and help you recreate a map and say, the tobacco shed was here. The pigs were kept here. This is corn crib. This is where the house was. They can actually give you firsthand knowledge on the ground. You're losing access to that information rapidly. And you're going to have to gather that. And that's where you've got a partnership. You're going to need people to reach out to these families and get them to trust us to archive it, just to make digital copies. And at very minimum, get a digital archive built up. And maybe it takes 20 years before you get a grant big enough to get somebody to sort through it. But you're going to have to get it digitally archived first before it's lost in a house fire. And grandma dies and they just sell off the property and it's gone.
Just one second, I'll be, you said a couple of things that jumped out to me. First, you said there's a story to tell, and you're absolutely right. There's so much more than what Chris presented earlier. There's definitely a story to tell, and we need to. And I think that kind of ties into where you were going too. But the other thing you said that really resonated with me is you said trust us. You didn't say the Forest Service. You didn't say the advisory board. You said us, which meant all of us as one big team, one big partnership, which is kind of what I'm looking for. It's exactly what I'm looking for all of us to work together for that. So we need to take that and run with it for sure.
Mr. Hall was involved with prior to the board being suspended. They were in a process of standing up a historical subcommittee for LBL, where it was going to be some board members, some outside members that were going to work on this very task. And then, as with everything else, by 2016, everything just kind of blew apart.
Yeah.
So now you're gonna have to kind of start all over.
I'll find one out in the air, just to say, I don't know. Has there ever been any discussion about any type of like LBL museum, or does it even exist?
There again, I'm trying to interrupt.
I'm sorry.
Bell City was what started out to me. That was our idea, to have a place to bring historical information on families that used to live here, capture the stories and what have you. And we started renovating one of those houses. And It's stalled out,
Where's that?
Bell City,
Okay,
Empire Farm.
okay. You're reading my mind, so keep going.
And that was what we had in mind. Ultimately, our dream would be, was to capture that kind of stuff, because exactly what you said, it's being lost. It's already a lot of it been gone, it's gone. But we don't need to let any more of it get away. And I realize the Black families have nothing at all to connect them here, other than their own memories. And a lot of that has not been passed down to the next generation. So both of those things have got to be, we got to work on both angles of that and be inclusive.
Absolutely.
Because the one thing I've heard people talk about, the passion that people that live there have and how important it is. One thing that gives us that passion is the love and the connection we have. That connection that's been broken for so many people has got to be repaired, and they've got to be reconnected. Because this didn't just belong to the people that was here when the land was taken. It belonged to people long before that, that was disassociated from the land for one reason or another. And that's got to be put back together.
Yeah, you know, you might hear some people say, well, we've got a museum, we've got the home place, but you know, you're not comparing, in my mind, apples to apples.
It's not.
And it was, last time Rick was here, we all took a tour with Lisa and all the, you know, the leadership team, and I went to these different places, and we went to Empire Farm, and we walked around, and I grew up going there as a child, and so I remember it a little bit before it closed down, and I still hear some people talking about how they wish, you know, we still had the Empire Farm, how sad it is, and see it on Facebook, and so we started brainstorming, well, what can we do with this area? What can we do to kind of bring it back to life a little bit that's cost efficient? And so we kicked around some ideas of like a trade fair, a trade day or something like that. And I love the idea of the museum. And if there's a way to intertwine all of that, I think we're looking at something really special.
Well, if you all can work with us, we have
I got you.
done a little bit towards at least drying it in, hopefully, so there's no more deterioration. But there needs to be an effort to reclaim it and bring it up to what it could be and put it into use for something like that for that purpose.
I love this. This is what this is for.
Preface my statement. Adele, you and Donnie, correct me when I say something wrong. When TVA took over, they built a museum.
Of sorts, yes, right there.
Well, I don't remember, I don't remember much about the museum. It's it's Woodlands Nature Center now, is that correct? It's the Village Wildlife Station. I mean, the Wildlife Station, yes. And it's my understanding they used some brick from some historic structures around here to build that. I don't remember what was in that museum. I don't know why it was closed. And at that time, possibly there was still a lot of animosity between us and TVA, that not as much interest should have been shown in it as should be. But I don't know what artifacts they had, and I don't know what happened to them. But that was a TVA deal. But if that were here today, it could be a living and growing thing, in my opinion.
Well, and then when Empire, when they built, well, I guess that's where the bees were, the demonstrations they used to do over at,
Well, what I was referring to is,
Where the nature station is now.
Station.
that's where the original museum.
It was one there, but it was through, it went through TVA, it was like my life.
I'll see, I did not know.
Kentucky Woodlands.
yeah.
But was that constructed after,
Administration.
was that constructed after TVA took possession of the land?
No,
Oh, it was not?
no. It was with the Corps of Engineers, and that was, Kentucky Woodlands area. And a friend of mine just told me he has a booklet that he's gonna try to find on that if there's been several different people write the history of the Kentucky Woodlands. But a friend of mine just told me the other day, he had a copy of something he's gonna try to find. It was written in 1948, I think, about that area. So that'd be, you know, I'm hoping he finds it. I have to keep reminding him of that, but yeah.
Okay, well, I misspoke.
No, you're just off the track a little bit, just kind of off the track.
But the essence of what you said is true. And that it behooves us to recapture a lot of that.
If you look on Facebook, which as you all know, there's between the Rivers Facebook page, and there are other Facebook pages exploring LBL, da, 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 da. But people, and mostly young people, are constantly asking questions. Where is that? What was that?
Yeah.
Right. See that too.
Mhm.
Strangely enough, there's still a lot of artifacts on the ground out there. I mean, by in between the nature station and Empire Farms, me and my dad stumbled across a grindstone about 10 years ago and turned it over for our guys here. We ran into the small gauge railroad, the actual railroad iron, over there as well. I mean, a lot of those artifacts from the stuff that was just presented from the iron works and stuff, but stuff that's still sitting on the ground out there. You find it when the water goes down during the winter.
You're saying.
You see the outlines for buildings, the ferries, docking stations and stuff. That stuff's still there.
Yeah, I think Chris has done some work on, and I'm kind of, I'll reel myself back in, but I think Chris has done some pretty exciting work, partnering with the National Park Service, Fort Donaldson down on the south end, doing some ground penetrating radar or something to locate some of those, maybe a septic tank, or I don't remember what you were looking for, but
So we've gone out to Fort Donaldson to do work with them on trying to make sure that their future project, doing their section 106 work, make sure that their future projects work okay. But I also have partnered with SIU. They've gone down just recently with ground penetrating radar and magnetometry, trying to do non-invasive research at Fort Henry on LBL to try and help tell that story better.
this man,
I worked at SIU. And I also have worked with Fort Donaldson. You need to do something simple, like that presentation we had today. It needs to be around this area. You can do simple stuff. And you do exhibits. Like most people don't know that it was iron furnaces and what they did. And how they operate. They didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
That's another form of incitement.
Do you
It
have
needs
the
to be
ability
told.
to do that in a 15 to 20-minute video segments? And not only have them available at like visitor centers, but upload them on the website as well?
There was one about the iron furnaces that was either at home place or the nature station that was available several years ago about the iron furnaces.
We just have to ask Chris to talk faster. Yeah. I asked him to condense this today. Yes, absolutely. That's a wonderful idea.
Because then it becomes a resource that the schools can use, even if they don't have the funds for a field trip.
Right.
Or they do it as part of their teach up prior to coming over here and give them more background before they actually walk on the ground. It's kind of hard to herd cats.
You know, that's a, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Page.
And we have the demonstration for you to kind of go above and beyond and do some other stuff too. But, you know, an idea that just popped in my head is, we've done some outreach programs before with interpretation, environmental education, and we'll take animals, but maybe we tell a different story. Maybe we take a whole different approach. What do you have?
Go ahead.
That's all I have.
This is a brochure that's, with Tennessee National Wildlife Refuge, and it's got, posts on the ground. I think it could be done without having posts like back to the app again where you have it, but it's, buildings that were standing that aren't standing anymore, and they got pictures, and 15 posts tells you when you're at, on this brochure, what you would see if you were still there. There's only one building you still see from the road, and that's a church. But this is a brochure that we picked up and, you know, taken with you. I think it could be online too, like for an app for LBL.
Yeah.
And I've collected some photos of that, but I think that's something that, you know, needs to be done here. So I've got several of these people can have if they want them.
And that's land that was taken by the federal government. Correct. See, that's that area.
Yeah, that was, it was because the county seat is Paris, Henry County. It's a point of land between the Tennessee and the Big Sandy River. And it got cut off from the county seat. You had to go down through Benton County, Big Sandy, get around back to your county seat. There was an old bridge there before the lake was flooded, was on the Big Sandy River, but it was a small bridge. You like you think of a small creek right now or a small river. But in order to replace that, it would have to be a bridge size Paris Landing or bigger. They weren't gonna build two bridges that close together.
Right.
But when you cross Paris Landing Bridge, it's the point of land between the Tennessee or Big Sandy. And that's just one of the brochures we've done on that. So I kind of use that as a sample. So.
And it's a wildlife refuge.
Yeah, that's why it's actually still owned by TVA, but it's operated by Fish and Wildlife Service.
We've kicked around the idea before of like an auto tour with an app.
That's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is perfect for my ADHD. I'm all.
Would
over
it
the
be
place.
possible to have signage with QR codes?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Or
Yeah,
interact with that?
possibly.
We've discussed that in the past. One of the main issues is the lack of cell phone coverage.
That's getting better as we
Say
speak.
better today
It's
than it
getting
was.
better. Since AT&T went on the tower and we've got 4 comms towers on it.
One of the things, Mark, again, when you're talking about diversity, if we're trying to encourage more diversity in visitation, people actually coming as customers to Land Between the Lakes. You know, like, we have an African American History Month. And unfortunately, I think there seems to be such a density of programs just during that month that if that's your primary focus, you're gonna get lost in an overwhelming amount of information. There's programs should be more focused year round,
Yeah,
but then I also think you need to look at whether it's that or any other subset of culture or demographics, looking for publications, Facebook pages, or other medias that focus primarily on that part of the population.
yeah, the problem that I see, I guess, is that, February, the weather's not great for coming out and recreating and swimming or doing whatever, so absolutely, we need to have something in the peak season, where folks are wanting to get out and about.
Well, I don't know why, but Paris Lane and State Park on the south end, I don't know why, but there's a picnic area there. And it just seems like in the last few years, there's been more African Americans there. And I know part of it's Fort Campbell probably has a factor on it because we're close there, but I don't think that's the true whole thing, but just wonder why all of a sudden they've started coming more.
I don't know, but
I just noticed it more, but.
I've noticed a more diverse population all around down on the south end, Gatlin Point, being one tiny campground. And I would almost, this is Jamieism, but I would almost venture to guess that Fort Campbell does play a pretty significant role. John?
I'll make it simple for you all. I grew up in a time when the Green Book was the way of traveling. I can remember my grandfather, anytime we traveled in the South, there was always a Green Book right there on the, he had a little newsstand with his newspaper and he has a little lamp and his little chair. I'm sure you all know that setup. But a lot of that was based upon visibility. There's less likelihood of you encountering raucous crowds or people with nefarious intentions for you if you are on a byway where you see more people, where there's more traffic and stuff. So that's probably part of it, even though it is close to Fort Campbell, it's on a thoroughfare where people, there's a lot of visibility there.
Yeah. You're right.
With some of the things, and this is a personal action I'm gonna grind, but Deb, you've heard this meeting before. Our visitor center. How many people are gonna come down that ramp and have the trust in us to know that there is something good and wholesome and safe and encouraging back down that short road? When you can ride past it at 60 miles an hour and you don't see it. How many millions of dollars of opportunity do we have right there that's lost because we won't cut about 3 acres of pine trees and mow around the pond so that the same people who want to come here to recreate and fish in a safe location, the same people who are willing to pull off to the side of the road and have a picnic, we put three picnic tables in mobile. The same people who can go over and look at what we call the tadpole pond or the mosquito pond. We have to open those things up so that people see them. Now, with me and my family, my son is just like me, when the road stops, when we start walking. But he's like me, I grew up kind of different. Not everybody is willing to do that. And a lot of this new generation, if they can't see it, they're not going to go because they're scared of everything. Because that's just kind of some of the things that they've dealt with, or better yet, a lot of those traumas that our parents and grandparents face, we hasn't had. So you want people, you have to show them what that final destination is. Then they'll stop.
To eliminate the fear factor.
Exactly, to eliminate the fear factor, because I also grew up in Walker County, Alabama, which is right outside of Coleman, Alabama, which was a sundown county. And I know what it's like, to have, to be like, 6:30, find the gas.
Yeah.
So those are the types of things that I think would be beneficial, or make it encouraging for people just to stop.
I thought go about some subcommittees. This might be a good time to decide to do some subcommittees. And the subcommittees might also reach out to the public that we all serve. And it would not be against the rules to ask some of them to serve on that committee with us, to look at ways, just kind of thing. I would like to see ownership built of this place, because that's what protects it, for one thing, if people feel an ownership of it. And that's what makes it precious to people, is they feel like they bought into it and they own part of it. So somehow we've got to convey that ownership to the public that we want to appeal to, which is all the public. And make them know they're welcome and that it belongs to them. And they need to take care of it and be interested.
So we're seeing some common themes: ownership, feeling welcome or safe. If you want to combine those, interpretation, tell the story, have the museum,
Preservation.
those all tie in together. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, but and we talked before this, I think my role here, and it's morphing perfectly, is to kind of start developing those agenda items for next time. Where do we go with this? What do we do with it? What's my assignment? What's my role in the meantime between now and 6 months from now until we have the next meeting? And so we're having some good conversation, getting some good ideas. I know I said something to Christine this morning. I said, "You got me on for an hour and 15 minutes? There's no way I can talk for this." But as the day went on, I've started getting ideas popping in my head. So we may be here a little longer. It's not like how this is going.
You need you.
We do.
Part of this, to me, I always say, don't reinvent the wheel. But Trent County has a very active historical society right now. So that would be the first thing to reach out to, is hit your county historical societies that probably have a lot of this already documented. Subject matter experts. You've got two great universities within a rock throw here. Murray has a very active history department. I've graduated through their history department. The resources are there. You've got to be able to coordinate and bring them to the table and say, okay, here's what we need help with. And get those smart minds around the table and start building some relationships and figure out how you're going to fund it.
Yeah, and we're fortunate to have that foundation, to have, like you said, the two universities and the Trigg County Historical Society already there to tap into. And what you said earlier about losing those resources rapidly, that sinks in. That's probably one of the most true statements I've heard all day. So sounds like we need to take action and move on it. And I'm about to run out of gas. I need more ideas. I need more. Go ahead.
You need to get youth, all kind of youth. Cause that is what sustains the program. When the youth go a place, when they grow up, they want to go where they had those good mentors. That's right. You don't just need, and diversity is not for just Black people.
That's what I was getting ready to say.
It's for all people. This is our American history, and everybody needs to get it.
Youth in any race is important, for sure. And you're starting to see a lot of differences in these younger generations versus mine and my parents. And sometimes it concerns me, especially our new folks coming in. Yes, that's extremely important.
And we need to have also a diverse staff.
Yes.
That's something else.
Yes. Well, I think it starts there. And when you say staff, we have close to, I'm going to venture 40 to 50 staff out in the campgrounds that you don't even see, that's not here wearing these uniforms in this office. And they're frontline staff. They're our backbone. So I think, how do we outreach? How do we recruit? How do we get them folks here to be your frontline staff? And I think that eliminates the fear factor and the interpretation, or doesn't eliminate it. It helps with it, I guess, is where I'm going. That's it kind of starts to bridge that gap a little bit, I think. And that was one thing that crossed my mind when Lisa and I were talking. I thought, well, if we can get some frontline staff and kind of create diversity in our workforce, I think that's a good foundation too. I think we've got a lot of good stuff to go with. Now I'm on time.
Keep on there.
Keep going. We'll keep going.
I would say, as you build some of these resources and put together some many presentations,
from camping at Piney and Hillman Ferry, you guys have a great job of sending staff down to these campgrounds and doing presentations, especially during holiday weekends. But I've never encountered historical presentations.
Yeah, that's what I said
And
earlier.
I would like to see
Yeah.
that brought into the campgrounds, because that's a huge market of customers. Bringing their grandkids there, you can make a really big impression. If you have the knowledge, you gotta share.
Yeah, did a lot of historical presentations in the campgrounds, because I did a lot of them, so, never done before. About the areas and all that stuff, so.
So what's an idea that we're missing? What's something that's popped into your head that you may not want to say that hasn't been said yet?
When it was falling, when they flooded, did they flood entire communities? Literally? When they flooded?
Oh, yeah.
I'm hearing yes, but we need to ask the subject matter
They
expert.
did.
Let's let them answer that.
Several
Yeah.
communities.
If they didn't flood them, from what I'm hearing, those dried over on them.
And you had people that moved from the area to be flooded on, that moved up on higher ground. And a few years later, they had to move again. And again.
3 times.
Because they didn't do both lakes at the same time. It was staggered. It was a pretty good time period in between the first dam and the second
Yeah.
dam.
Some of them moved from Kentucky, then had to move from Barkley, then had to move from LBL.
Yeah, but I mentioned earlier, I grew up here, in Grace County. I didn't know that until I started working here in 2002. I had no idea. So if I didn't know, just living 30 miles from here, imagine the folks who don't know that story. I think it's a story
People are
that.
fascinated by the story. I went to the
Absolutely.
Museum, and we tell the story, and never told it to anybody yet that hadn't just been enthralled with the idea.
It's heartbreaking.
To know more how that worked.
I guess I'll say it because maybe somebody else is scared too. I graduated history. I'm right now reading through the 1619 project, some other books, especially going into Reconstruction. The number one barrier I believe you will face when you try to get families to come back and tell their story is how it's going to be told. A case in point, when the United States decided to do the Native American History Museum in DC, half the tribes refused to participate because they didn't believe they had control of their story.
Yeah.
Some of the things in the story are not going to be pleasant. And I believe in the past, when that was brought up, TVA and especially the Forest Service was not comfortable making presentations that told unpleasant facts. So you guys and staff are going to have hard conversations about how you're going to address those issues. Because if you're gonna ask a family to tell their story, they're not going to want to have to filter it through your moral perspective.
I had a gentleman reach out to me. It's been a couple of years ago when I was doing recreation and special uses. And they wanted to do a play, and they wanted to travel around the different facilities here, and they wanted to do this play that told the story. And, David, I think I put him in touch with you. I can't not remember the guy's name, but that's exactly what I told him. It's not our story. It's not your story to interpret and make up. You need to speak with some of the former residents, and I don't ever know what happened with that.
It was getting up and going in COVID.
Okay, that's the common thing. Then COVID hit. That shuts everything down, it seems like.
We have a film that was captured back when we were at the height of our concern about what was gonna happen. By the gentleman that was in charge of the condemnation process that happened with Corps of Engineers for the impoundment area. He had retired. He was old. He had cancer. The TV station in Nashville, Tennessee found him, interviewed him about what he remembered about that and what he thought about the idea. This was before TVA left over here, about TVA maybe commercializing something. That was the big one on there. He said it would be wrong because we made promises to those people. He went ahead and told that, but the part that got me most was, he said, if I die and go to hell, it won't be for womanizing or drinking, it'll be the way we treated the people between the rivers. Because we were told, get in there and buy that land as cheap as we could, as quick as we could, and get them out of there. Now, this is the impoundment area we're talking about. Because if we wait around, they're gonna realize the property they got left is very valuable. We're not gonna be able to buy it the way we wanna buy it. He said, I did my job. But he said it was wrong. We testified on the stand when we were forced to go to trial. We didn't go to trial on every condemnation they had, but they were taken to court on some of them. He said, we said in court, if there was gumbo land, it was worthless. He said, in fact, that was a lie. It was some of the richest land in the world, and we bought it for little or nothing. You know, that's what the families, a lot of them remember and deal with. So no, they're not gonna want somebody else to tell the story.
David interviewed Harold Van Morgan, who's called the father of Land Between the Lakes. He was a TVA planner. And unfortunately, the street out here has his name on it. But David asked him in that interview if he regretted, because LBL had been declared failure by Foresta, the Tennessee author. Now, he didn't blame the TVA, he blamed corporate America for some reason TVA, LBL being a failure. Because it had promised 10 million visitors, that's why it had to have so much land. And it failed. We would get millions instead, maybe a year. So, but Van Morgan, which really, you know, there was a fair amount of violence against folks by the TVA. And TVA, I've given the speech 100 times. TVA does a lot of good today. Economic development. They're staying in their wheelhouse today. But they have a past that is dark and bloody and awful and horrendous. Government overreach. That old movie from the 40s, Big River, or whatever it was.
Montgomery Cliff, I believe.
Montgomery Cliff.
Yeah.
You got it. About their abuses. But anyway, back to Van Morgan, the father of Land Between the Lakes. David asked him, do you have any regrets about that? Because Conway Atwood, a hero, World War II, drugged from his house. His wife, who couldn't drive, left in the house, handcuffed, and there's still witnesses to this, and taken to jail in Louisville. He was my next door neighbor. He had 300 acres of ground. And put him in jail for 7 days. And the reason the TVA would have people locked up here for 7 days is to give them time to tear your house down. I mean, literally. I mean, you think this is something that happened 150 years ago, but this happened very recently. So they wanted to put you in jail long enough. TVA would have you put in jail long enough so your house could be bulldozed to the ground. In Mr. Atwood's case, Miss Mamie was left there. She couldn't drive. She had to walk, didn't have a phone. Had to walk and call her daughters and Katie's to come and get her. And TVA had then put locks on the house, locked the house up with a chain. And said, if you want to get in your house, your parents' house, you got to come out here to TVA headquarters and get your keys, which they didn't do. They got his livestock, he had cattle and hogs, and they loaded up the back. 2 days later, TVA bulldozer came, literally, I mean, it sounds like fiction, I know. Literally bulldozed his house into the ground with all their goods inside, their television, their clothes. And so the tactics were brutal. You couldn't stand up to them. And Mr. Van Morgan was asked if he regretted any of that. He said, no. We did all those people a favor. They were so destitute and poor and stupid that we did them a favor. He still believed that to his dying day, that they wrote that we found people between the rivers that didn't even know how to go to a doctor. So we would take them to a doctor. All those were lies. Just simply lying about the justification for the brutality of this, of having this, national recreation here. No stories can go on forever. I remember my grandparents, my Uncle Rex Holland owned the, east end of what's now the Buffalo Range over here. 80 some acres. My grandparents had already been run out for the Barkley project, which ended up not being the Barkley project. It ended up being Extension of the Wildlife Refuge, excuse to take 12,000 more acres, Ferguson Springs. And so my grandparents were in their 80s with a brand new little bitty house after losing their 400-acre farm. So here comes the TVA now. Going out of that house, this brand spanking new house. And so my uncles, when I had 11 at the time, and in-laws decided they were going to not let TVA in the house because once they got in, they could put a price on it. So you wanted to keep them out of your house while you could. So I was 14. And my Uncle Rex was a game warden. John's gone, same job as he had. And they decided to not let him in. So the federal marshals and TVA showed up about a quarter of a mile from my grandparents' house. So they formed a perimeter. My uncles did, fight them off. And my father made me go across the road and sit under an apple tree. I don't want you here. That ticked me off. I was 14. I could fight as much as anybody else thought. I had to. So my father finally relented and let me go stand in the line to keep them out of my grandparents' house, the TVA and the federal marshals. So they drove up and my Uncle Rex said, "No, we're not armed. None of us have a weapon, but we don't plan on you getting in our parents' house." His parents, my grandparents. And they said, "We can take all of you down." And my father let me get in the line. I was in the lines. I was happy. 14, I may get my brains kicked out any minute, but I was happy about it being in the line. And so I said, "We can arrest all of you right now." He said, "Well, you can try to do that. You know, you probably can do it, but it won't be the simplest thing that you've ever done." So they had a little powwow, and the story goes on, the argument back and forth. They had a little powwow. And they got their heads together, they got in their car and drove off. But my grandparents defeated the TVA. They both died shortly after that, both of them, 65. So they died without TVA ever getting their house. There's 1,000 stories about that. But the degradation was done by Mr. Van Morgan and others by how stupid and backward and worthless the people were between the rivers. It was run into the ground and used as justification. A lot of the big papers, Courier Journal, even the WPST, promoted that. It didn't have social.
The words cut deep.
They cut deep and so it was brutal. We gloss over it. Yeah, we gloss over things. So that's glossed over by the TVA. If you don't make a TVA man, bring that up. They go berserk today. I've heard those stories. So anyway.
Well, we make a movie about it now. Hell, people come from all over you.
And we're making a 20,000 invested in a documentary now, kind of waiting for the final chapter. We need to wrap up.
I hold that lid off just to let you know that
Thank you
that's
for
something
pulling the lid
you
off.
guys have to be prepared to express, but you're not gonna earn trust and get people to open up to you about the history until they know how much you wanna gloss over.
Yeah, just a second, you've got a, in my mind, speaking for everybody, I think you've got a staff here who truly not just cares about Lamson Lake, but we care about the history. We care about the people who care about it. You know, we want to do the right thing. We want to be one team and serve the entire public. And that's a challenge. You know, I heard you talk about earlier, you know, you want to head off this group or that group or whatever. There's so many different groups. But at least for me, and I know all these folks, we definitely sympathize with you. We definitely want to work with you. We definitely want to do what's best for for all involved, for all the resources involved. So I don't know what that looks like. That's why we're here. But I just felt like after hearing your story, you need to know that how I feel as well. Ms. Dawson, did you have something?
Well, I don't think it's all sad. I think it's two sides to it. On one hand, when I came here to Kentucky and Tennessee, people talked about Birmingham. And I didn't even know what Birmingham was. I knew about Birmingham, Alabama, but I didn't know about this Birmingham. So I got that. But on the same hand, I saw kids for the first time they saw Eagle. And they were fascinated. For the first time, they saw things and did things with nature that they never had. So you gotta have a balance of telling this story. And that's gonna be the challenge. How do you tell all the truth and nothing but the truth? And show the other parts. It's not all bad. It's both. And you gotta show both to people.
The only way it can be all bad is if Between the Rivers doesn't live up to what it was supposed to be, which was for environmental education, so kids could do that. And to see it become a success. And if I have any regret, that's with me, it's about that. Because it didn't live up to it. It has the potential, but we never quite mastered that. And that's up to this group to hold the standard up and insist that that happened.
Well, reporters have asked many times, your land was stolen from you and you were beat over the head in the process, so to speak. Why would you even care? And why do you even give a darn about a piece of property where it was violently, in some cases, taken away from? Why do you care? It's because Della and Nancy both have, there's a good side to it. And you want that sacrifice to be worthwhile. My grandparents suffered greatly over this place, and I want it to be worthwhile. The sacrifices they made here in Mr. Atwood, others, hundreds of others, thousands of others. So it is weird for us to sit here and fight for the land between the lakes when it was violently taken away, but those are the rationales.
I heard-
the good side.
I heard Bill say earlier this morning, he said, I grew up here. Or not, maybe not grew up, maybe I didn't hear you right. But I heard him say that Lamb to the Lakes is why he retired, or why he came back, because he did it. So in my mind, that's one success story. It, it did touch someone. It did, there's a lot of Bill Perks out there. I'm one of them. I think Jerry's one of them who grew up here. Donnie, coming to Lamb to the Lakes, I can remember from a little kid, I've always wanted to work here. That was before I knew the story. I'm not sure how that would have affected me, but I guess where I'm going with this is we do have, I guess, one success story from touching someone.
I'm getting you way away from your.
That's what I was just getting, saying, we get away from the red, but that's okay. It's good conversation. It's conversation that needs to be had, and I think it's probably brought a lot of us together, I think, which is the intent of this whole session.
Well, then what we learned, when you talk about recreational diversity, there's a lot of diversity within LBL that needs to be represented. I mean, I know there's like 2 or 3 Chinese cemeteries when they were labor force here as well. So there is diversity. It's how you present that history in an honest but nuanced way that helps tell the story relevant to the time period. Some of it's going to be painful. I think the government has shied away from that in the past. It seems to be getting a little better in engaging America's true history, which isn't always as pleasant as our high school history books. But you guys are going to have to be prepared to have those conversations. Well, if you're going to bring in subject matter experts, the Trigg County's Historical Society, sit down with families and ask to archive some of their stuff. they're gonna have to be comfortable that this is a collaboration, that you're helping them tell their story. It's not your story. It's their story.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I was just gonna make the suggestion, and it could address a lot of these different topics or areas of concern, but including the history piece and providing a lot more information for those who are open to getting at it, but also again, promoting opportunities, whether it's a, targeted fishing event for underrepresented population or a interpretive trail or whatever it might be, would be development of an app for LBL. If you guys don't already have that, it could be really helpful. So it might be something we discuss and promote as a group, but it could be used to accomplish a lot of different things.
Thank you.
I agree.
I'm having a fishing derby June 10th at Cherokee.
Okay.
So
That's
I had,
exactly
this is
what
my
I could-
second,
Stuff just
so
like
y'all
that.
invite. My kids. Come out and help us with the kids.
When is that again?
June 10th. It's already scheduled. I got a pro bass fisher coming.
Yeah,
It's already scheduled. The 10th.
Cherokee Park have the ice cream.
Yes, it does.
well, I've got just a few minutes left, I think. Is there anything that I did not cover or we would like to see mentioned?
What do you want us to do? Cause I did this diversity thing, so what do you want us to do?
Well, you've done a lot. You pitched some ideas. We've got, definitely got my mind going, brainstorming. I think, what we want to do is to kind of start developing maybe an agenda for next time or putting this into a plan, I think. And, I just want you to be willing to help if I reach out to you, and I think I already know the answer to that. Because I'm probably gonna reach out to you, or somebody will.
Can I just add something?
Yes, sir.
So this whole diversity and recreation thing isn't new. It's been really being pushed by, especially the Park Service for the past 10, 15 years about how do we get underrepresented communities out to the parks. And if you do the same thing that you've been doing, it just doesn't work. I mean, we've got this great resource here, but how do you get folks, who traditionally didn't grow up hunting or fishing or mountain biking or riding OHVs to come to this area and do the things that we have to offer? And so it sounds like there's some great ideas, as far as like what Chris has going on with the interpretive panels, what you had brought up, things like that. And so I would just encourage everybody here to we don't have to wait until the next meeting. I mean, come at us with those ideas. I mean, there's money out there for bringing underrepresented communities here. So we have that in place already.
I thought going ahead and appointing a committee to start working on it. Some ideas are to bring back to the committee the next time that you meet.
I don't know if that's my decision to answer, but I would support it.
Yeah, subcommittees are possible. I think there's a few steps we have to go through as far as consulting with the USDA. And there's a difference between if they're standing committees and ad hoc committees. I'm sure you've probably done subcommittees before. Okay, yeah, there's a couple. That's one thing I was looking up earlier is there's a few hoops to jump through, but it's not as involved as having to go get a charter done. Let's see, subcommittees do not need a separate charter. However, the agency, the designated federal officer should consult with the committee management officer to develop a well-defined documented chart. You know, that we call them a lot of times letter of intent. What's the task? And then they have to do some checking with OGC. They have to do a little interaction there. Then, and there's some things they'd like to see in that charge. And then your question about if non-committee members could be on the subcommittee.
that's in here as well, is that well, subcommittees can function independently from the parent committee, this being the parent committee. Report directly to the federal officer. And then, subcommittees may be comprised of selected members of the chartered parent advisory committee, as well as non-committee members. And generally, the chairperson of a subcommittee is a member of the parent committee. And while other members may or may not be parent committee members, so basically says that part twice in two different things. So yeah, there's some, that's an avenue that we can take. Did I get anything?
No, I'm gonna do another plug on the Box account. And again, I'm Carlin Lewis in Public Affairs. But after the meeting, sometime this week at your earliest convenience, remember to set up your Box account, and there's instructions in your packet on how to do that. And that can be that repository where we share documents. So maybe we make that idea list and break down your ideas into a time frame, like what can we accomplish in a couple months or less? What can we do in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years? Put this timeline out so we can be held accountable to all the great ideas we came up with together today, but put those time frames in it so we know what to check in on and know what action items to develop. So I think the Box file sharing system will be good for the subcommittees to share information and collaborate. So again, check your packet for that. And if you need help with it, reach out to Christine or myself.
But it says here that in the charter that the board has the authority to create subcommittees. In consultation and the agreement of the DFO, subcommittees must report back to the board. It must not provide advice or work product directly to the agency.
That's right. Yeah. And yeah, the part I was talking about is just like an internal thing where something pushed back up. So yeah, again, it's not another recharting or anything like that. It's just tying in with that, officer in USDA to say, yeah, you got, it's us making sure we got it set up right under the law. Is the way I'd say it.
Yeah, so Walter, like the advisory board here advises the Secretary of Agriculture. The subcommittees would advise the advisory board, so they come back and present to you all as a group what they researched or collaborated on. So that's how that relationship works.
But they can also function as the hands and feet of the advisory board and going out and initiating relationships, whether it's with families for historical or the historical societies. And you're going to need these non-board members on these committees simply because with our turnover, having a history professor from Murray State on the subcommittee working with them, that would add that, that line of knowledge continues to move, even though board members go on and off. I see it being very valuable to have non-board members on the subcommittees.
So what I'm hearing is that you guys maybe potentially are looking at, because I've got to go to the CMO, correct? To check on this and OGC, so a subcommittee for historical, LBL historical information. I'm not sure what you guys want to call it, but.
Well, and the question is
Diversity integration.
But what else, what other changes were affected by this new document that is almost going to force us or encourage us to have a subcommittee? I think budget's one of the things that we're supposed to now muck around in, unfortunately. Is that going to require a subcommittee working with budget or any other areas that's now a board responsibility? Does it create the necessity for a subcommittee?
Yeah, I think we can try different things too. One thing I was going to mention, I think, but does this kind of lead into the next steps?
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, this is definitely leading into what you think of.
It's naturally progressing towards the next agenda item, next steps. So, yeah, I was gonna mention that idea of, we've got some options. We got, as you have subcommittees, and like I mentioned at the beginning, like, I'm the chairperson, I work for you. So if we want to meet more often, could say, figure some of these things out, discuss these things, hash these things out. If we want to get together, and you know, your time is very valuable, but if we wanted to get together over a multi-day period, to not just get started one day and go, oh, we'll see you in 6 months, and then we have to refresh and recrank things up. So those options are available as, it seems like right now, there's an interest in, for the diversity and recreation, which involves the history of pursuing a subcommittee. But I'd also put on the table of, do we want to get together again in a few months? And when we get together, do we want to have a roll up our sleeves, you know, and hash through things, and, you know, we could, develop some of these ideas further and do it over, you know, like sometimes like a half day, whole day, half day kind of thing. I just want to let you know that those are possibilities. Because what I want to do is, you know, your time is valuable. This work is important, and with just meeting twice a year, not having subcommittees, I don't see how we can build any momentum for getting things done. And I'm new to back stuff, because everywhere else I've worked, we just work. And I don't want the beauty of having FACA to limit us on what we can do together too. And it was mentioned, what did Jamie say? Come at us with those ideas. That, you know, so there's things that we can be doing as well, just with ideas and interactions and things like that to again, build some momentum to get things done. Yes.
And I suggest we have 3 subcommittees. We're looking at your agenda. One on diversity and recreation, that's one. One on heritage and the LBL. And the other one on this, what do you call it? The actual charter. That's what you want.
Say that again.
The charter itself.
Well, there's questions on the charter, but I
So-
think we also have to do like a 1 year, some kind of management plan now as well.
On that's 3 committees. On the charter, diversity, on recreation, and 3 heritage and the LBL. And we have these 3 committees.
And then, and we don't have to do the annual plan, but advise on the annual plan. Right. So, and that's one thing is us figuring out like, what, how do you do that? Where do you start? That's what I was saying earlier. What kind of information do we get in front of this group, and at what point? And we had some good discussion around that. And so there might be, I'll put this on the table. But say the 3 things I put on the table, we can do a combination of them. Is we can be working on subcommittees, working towards, you know, having those. And again, if we want to meet again before, what, 6 months meet again. And have it as a, you know, a longer period of time to further dig into this and figure these things out, because just thinking through it is, okay, you got a subcommittee. There might be a little bit of, crank that engine. So would it help to also be getting together while we're furthering the idea of those subcommittees, while we're working on the, you know, whatever internal coordination we need to do? So just as far as how to get things done, sometimes the answer is, well, do a little bit to a lot of several ideas, and there'll be a spark somewhere, or all of the ideas, but some things will start to happen. So that's, again, want this to be valuable. Your time is valuable. I want this to be worthwhile, and us have results. You know, everyone here is committed to seeing results, and so I'm trying to navigate the idea of FACA, and I don't want that to be so constraining that we can't, we can't, and that's sort of been some of the frustrations in the past. Some been thinking through, like, how do we, you know, break that mold? So as far as next steps, I say, those ideas are on the table, and how do we want to interact on that? Yes.
Let me throw this out there because it sounds like this may be my last meeting. But the board in the past has offered repeatedly to meet more often. I would suggest in current circumstances, we might look at quarterly. But I think we have an opportunity to be more of a hybrid, not only with the subcommittees, but using technology. Some of this stuff can be done with not all of us being right here at this table. We can make a lot of progress if we use some technology, whether it's a virtual meeting or doing Box or whatever it's called, to get a lot of questions and research done, interactions with staff. I don't think it requires us all to be at this table to make progress. And I'm always advocating for let's use technology to make us more efficient and effective.
Excellent. And, excellent. You brought that up last time as well, and that's some of the work with having the opinion in Box. So some great things for us to explore. And in my approach, and see what you think about this, is, I'd say is, as far as what's before us to do in that idea of, we're going to learn together how to do and explore things and what works. And that gives us a little bit of grace to try some things. And sometimes when we do that, again, we don't know where lightning's going to strike, where some magic's going to happen, and involving the university, involving the historical societies. I think it's fantastic because you never know what's going to grow some legs and build some capacity and momentum and get some results. But by, casting those wide nets, so I'm open to anything you'd like to do. And if you want to get together again, and a combination of technology and that's how I say, that's kind of spirit of learning. What are some of the things we want to try and see what works best? Try, not just try and I don't want to waste anybody's time, but our best foot forward and try some things to get some results, get some progress made, get some good done.
I would like to see us use the online format, whether it's Box or whatever, to within a week, hopefully everybody's generated an ID to log into that, and uploading some additional information, like if we can get an adjusted or corrected copy of the new rules here, where those documents have been merged. Continue to try to flush out some questions. We talked about like some funding issues, or what does this mean that we can use this, but we can't use that? And I think that you're gonna have to go to much higher levels to try to get an answer on that, because I'm not sure even anybody in the Forest Service understands what that document says right now. But being able to ask those questions online, I know that we all learn exponentially faster. If I get to see the question that Donnie asked, see the response to it, it inspires either another question or at least clarifies in my mind that issue, and I can move on to something else. So seeing those questions asked and answered from the various members on the board and the staff, we pick up speed.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we do subcommittees using Zoom and Box? And then have one big meeting when we bring the information back to the department.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah.
Because there's gonna be a lot of questions in sub meetings.
And would you want that next meeting when we're all together in October, or do you want something sooner than that?
I think it needs to be sooner, but the other one I'll throw out there, and I've been saying this for close to a dozen years, October's the worst month in the world to schedule a meeting.
Yeah.
Because at least half of our October meetings got canceled due to the government got shut down because there's no approved budget. So do September, do November, but don't schedule October. half of them got canceled. And then, well, we'll see you in a year. Because then they just blew it off and we'll see you next spring. So I said, don't schedule it. Bad things happen.
Remember that from last time.
Brian,
I was just adding 6 months.
Brian, go ahead, I'm sorry. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah,
Thank you. Sorry about that. I was just going to suggest maybe to Rick's point, maybe we try to schedule for quarterly, so we're meeting more frequently, realizing maybe everybody may not be able to be on, but we could at least keep the conversation going more frequently, and then the committees or subcommittees could continue or start their work and continue provide updates, and it would be more active.
Yeah, thank you. And for, say, developing the charge, that's what was for the subcommittees. That's something I think we could do online. Say if we had something drafted, like, and then the group can say, let's make that better, or that's not clear. That's something as far as honing in, like, what's that intent document for the subcommittee. And I think that's something we can work on interactively to get started. Where, say, something's drafted, it's put online, and you can say, that's not what we talked about. That didn't make sense, and everybody can help shape that.
So what are the subcommittees? We can start with that. Come up with, if we agree, you talked about 3.
Yeah, there's for the responsibilities of the group, the 5. One is promoting public participation in the management of. I'm not seeing, everything we're talking about kind of comes under that, even though that's number 1. It's the next one is environmental education, which is also in number 3, which is an annual work plan for recreation and environmental education, including the heritage program, which is a lot of what we've talked about today. And then so that's one thing. Then there's the annual forest management and harvest plan. And then there's advising on LBL fund. Advising on the LBL fund that one may be simpler of, here's the projects we've lined up for LBL fund, draft, advise. The other ones with the annual work plan for recreation, environmental education, including the heritage program, is where a lot of this discussion is around bringing in partners, or telling the story, all that. It seems like there's a lot of rich mining and contacting and discussing to go on. The annual forest management harvest plan, I think we've got some work to do. And if it's a subcommittee, we can work with that subcommittee of what's the best way to present this information? How far ahead do we do this? Does it start with just, a map? Is it a list? What is that to get it ready to bring to the committee? So something around the recreation, environmental education, including the heritage program. And that could be just thinking out loud. The subcommittee maybe doesn't have to think in terms of an annual plan, but thinks in terms of, a menu of, a list of, ideas of, and then the Forest Service can take that and say, well, we'll work with you on what's the annual plan, what's the bite we want to take out of that universe of opportunities that the subcommittee comes up with. I'd say that subcommittee may not want to limit itself to, we've got to start to help it develop an annual plan. That may constrain too much. It might be better to say, well, how can we talk about all the possibilities and come back with some idea of, like, we think these are some